Dave Hole,
Okay.
welcome to A Breath of Fresh Air. Fabulous to have your company. How are you today?
I'm fine, thanks. It's a pleasure to be with you.
And where do we find you?
At home in Perth.
Are you actually living in Perth now?
Yeah, well, I always have actually.
I thought it was outside of Perth.
Oh, well, no, okay, you're getting technical now.
I know,
Yeah,
no, but it's a
I'm in the
Perth
hills.
suburb.
I'm actually in the suburb of Perth. Yeah, I'm in
Ah,
Darlington. I'm in the hills outside Perth. Yeah.
okay. So you've got an incredibly interesting story, Dave Hole. There are many people listening to this podcast. There are many people listening to this today who may not have heard of you. And I guess that's quite understandable, given that you've lived a rather isolated life on the west coast of Australia. But there would be some very keen blues fans who know all about you. And I'm hoping to let everybody know about your story, because it's a pretty awesome one, isn't it?
Well, it's the only one I've got. I mean, it is what it is, you know.
And you're happy to share it with us?
Yeah, of course.
That's great. So let's start where it all began for you. And I know that you, at a very tender age, you discovered the guitar. Can you tell us what transpired at the age of, I think you were 11, weren't you, when you got your first guitar?
Yeah, well, I got into music by just listening on the radio, and I loved the radio. I had it on 24/7, drove my parents crazy just because listening to, and we're going way back here to things like, you know, Buddy Holly and you know, Elvis Presley, all that stuff, way back, Chuck Berry, and I just loved anything with a guitar in it. So I loved any of the twangy guitar stuff that you heard on the radio. So I pestered my parents from the age of about 6. Actually, I was asking for a guitar, and finally they relented when I was 11, and that's when I got my first acoustic guitar. Started playing, full of enthusiasm. Didn't get very far, and stuck it under the bed as you do, and kind of gave up. But then when I was 16, I met a guy at high school who was putting a band together, and this is now, you know, Beatles, Rolling Stones, Mania time. Everyone had to be in a band, you know. And he was putting together a band, and he wanted a rhythm guitar player to fill out the band. And I said, oh, yeah, I play guitar, which is really not true because I could hardly play a note. But he was really good, and he taught me a few chords and that. So I got back into it then. So
Right.
really, I had a hiatus of about 5 years, you know.
Right. So what was it about the sound of the guitar that really got you, as opposed to any other instrument?
Well, it's the guitar is popular with just about everybody. I mean, there's something about it. I mean, when I heard the blues, I love the way the guitar can actually sing, you know, and some instruments sing. I mean, anything like the violins sing, and harmonicas can make vocal kind of sounds, and slide guitar particularly has a singing quality. So I love that. But initially it wasn't that. It was more the twangy sort of, like, I mean, it was just exciting. You got to realize that, like going back to the 1950s, the music that was there before we heard the early rock and roll, it was pretty kind of smooth and orchestral, and, you know, if there was a guitar, it was like really in the background and that sort of thing. And then suddenly there's this kind of really punchy instrument playing. Duane had a few instrumentals and things like that. You know, the Peter Gunn, I don't know if you know that song, but it's like do 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 do, and that's a really punchy guitar riff. And, you know, as a kid, I mean, I'd leap around on the furniture when it came on the radio and jump around and just got overexcited and all that. So it was just something I love, and I loved music generally. I mean, all the songs that came on, I knew all the words to all the pop songs of the day.
Right.
Yeah.
You were originally born in England, weren't you?
Yeah.
How did you end up in Western Australia?
Well, my parents migrated when I was 4 years old, so you know, almost an Aussie.
What was it like at the time then, growing up? I mean, is that how you spent all of your time, just listening to the radio? Well, I shouldn't say just listening to the radio, but you spent all of your time listening to the radio.
Well, it's not far off the truth, actually, because where I lived, it's actually where I live now, or very close to where I'm living now, but it was pretty rural. I mean, we were in the middle of the Jarrah Forest and we were on a hill, and there was only 2 other houses on that hill, and no other kids to play with. So I was pretty feral. I'd run around in the bush and do stuff like that, and I was a pretty lonely child because by the fact that I didn't have anyone to play with. So I kind of gravitated to anything like that. The music was a kind of a little bit of a lifeline for me. It was a communication of sorts that probably I was missing in other ways.
Yeah, right. And who were some of your early influences then?
Well, they were people like Buddy Holly, and the Shadows, the instrumental. The twangy guitar that Hank Marvin and the Shadows. That was really got me. So that was my very first kind of guitar influences. And then actually I did also have a bit of a soft spot for some, my dad had a Segovia classical record. I actually loved that too. I just loved music really, but I think the main formative influences were really the British blues thing, when the Yardbirds, when Rolling Stones and the Yardbirds and John Mayall, people like that, when they kind of surfaced, that's when I really got serious about passionate about the music.
Yeah. Were your parents musical too?
They sort of were. Neither of them was a great player. My mum sort of played a bit of piano. My father played. I don't know if any people remember the old skiffle bands. Skiffle groups was a thing, and my father played a T-chest bass with a couple of his mates. They just plonked around on it. So they were music lovers, but they weren't musicians really.
So, and were they supportive of you when you were playing more and more? When you joined that first band?
Initially they were, until I got serious. But they were quite supportive, and they thought, this is good for him, he's enjoying himself. And then when I was at high school and I got really seriously into bands, and they saw that as a bit of a distraction. So I went to university and I was still playing in bands at night, and I was studying, and I think that the crunch came when I graduated. I got my physics degree and immediately turned professional musician, which they didn't think that was a great career move at the time. And it probably, in retrospect, they were right. Like percentage-wise, the chances of making a living as a musician were not great.
better as a physicist. If you had to go back to that time again, would you make the same decision again?
No, I wouldn't, but I don't regret doing it, because I think any sort of education of that sort, it's a great teacher. It teaches you a lot about discipline, about learning, about applying yourself, focusing on things. And I did enjoy my time at university, and I enjoyed it. I had a big interest in physics. It wasn't like I was doing it reluctantly, but my passion for music was stronger. So if I had my time again, no, I'd lock myself in my bedroom and keep playing guitar to get better quicker.
Really? Would you really?
Absolutely.
So you wouldn't have ever gone to university to get the physics degree?
No.
I thought you were saying when you said that you would do it differently, that you would actually go off and work as a physicist after graduating rather than music. So your regret is that you didn't do enough music earlier.
It is. In actual fact, looking back now, it is. Because I've learned over the years that you absorb things more quickly, and you're more adept at learning stuff when you're young. So I would have done, if I had my wisdom that I now have when I was young, I would have applied myself in those formative years, like full on. I mean, I was pretty obsessed with it as a teenager playing guitar, but I would have been even more. I'd have been one of these 12 hours a day guitar players in the bedroom,
Right. So at age,
just like 4 hours, like I did.
So at age 16, when you joined the band, how good were you?
Oh crap! A total learner.
Right.
I learned as we went along, and the other guitarist, Daryl Upson, who is still my best friend, really, I guess. He taught me a lot of the basic stuff, and he was far superior than I was, but I could only play single notes. I was terrible at chords, and I wasn't very good at anything, but I could play single notes. In a way, it's easier just to play it. So I sort of became the lead guitarist because he could play the rhythm parts, which were difficult. So I kind of became the lead guitarist, and just went from there, really. Learnt from him, and then learnt from records.
And your influences, I believe, changed at that time too, didn't you? You kind of grew more, you got much more into the traditional blues.
Well, yes. I really discovered the traditional blues via, like so many of my generation, but via the Rolling Stones and the Yardbirds and the other British bands, the Animals, all those kind of bands. And they were always doing covers of traditional blues, which we'd never heard here, and most people in England hadn't even heard. But they were always credited their influences, and they, like the Stones did Little Red Rooster, and they credited Howling Wolf as it being a Howling Wolf song, and their name was derived from a Muddy Waters song. So that was intriguing. And you read the liner notes on the early Rolling Stones albums, and you think, well, who are these guys that they're copying? Who are they? I mean, they must be amazing. And of course they were, but we just couldn't get the records. And eventually we did. A mate of mine got the first deep blues that I heard. A mate of mine got hold of a Muddy Waters record, and that was like that was a seminal thing. It was an epiphany. Like, the clouds parted and the sunshine. I just was bowled over when I heard Muddy Waters. I couldn't believe that music could be so powerful, and that really set my course from then on.
And what about B.B. King? His guitar playing was akin to yours, wasn't it?
Yeah, I discovered B.B. a little bit later. Really, I discovered that by when John Mayall made the Blues Breakers album with Eric Clapton. That's when I think everyone realised about Freddie King, B.B. King, that they were doing those songs. And then I, of course, searched out B.B. King records and a whole host of others, Otis Rush, people like that, and really discovering them one by one. And we used to order the records. I mean, we made terrible mistakes. Like we'd order like Muddy Waters' name is McKinley Morganfield, so you'd see the writing credit on a song, and it'd be McKinley Morganfield has written this song. And we order a McKinley Morganfield record on the record shops. Sorry, there's no one. There's no one of that name. We didn't even know that was Muddy Waters, and so they had these things. Chester Burnett, which was Howling Wolf. So we're going, we want a record by this by Burnett, Sorry, it's not
very naive when you look back, huh?
Yeah.
I'm chatting with Dave Hole. He's one of the all-time slide guitar greats, and he's talking to us from his home in Perth in Western Australia. Dave, tell us about what happened to you in 1976, because that turned your life completely around, didn't it?
I'm not sure what you alluding
to. I'm talking about when you broke your little finger.
Oh, yes, of course. Okay, well, yeah, almost forgot. Yeah, no, as far as my style of playing slide guitar, it was a big influence because I broke the little. Normally, you put the slide, which most people would know, it's a metal tube or a bottle neck or something, on your little finger of your left hand, and you play the guitar, like slide up and down the thing. And I'd started to do that because I was a huge fan of Elmore James, and I wanted to try and do a couple of his songs. So I started to do that, and I'd only really just started learning it. And I went and kicked end to end when my mate was playing football and went up for a specky mark, came down with a broken little finger.
You're talking Aussie rules football?
Aussie rules, yes. Yeah. And so I had a cast on it, and I was playing in a band at this time, and I couldn't play ordinary guitar even. I couldn't play guitar at all. There was a cumbersome thing on there. But the slide that I had just fit quite snugly on the index finger of my left hand, and I could manage to just drape it over the neck and sort of fiddle around that way. And I thought, I know what I'll do in these 6 weeks or so that I'm going to have to recover. I'll just fiddle around and find out, because slide is a different tuning. You don't use normal standard guitar. Well, you can, but it was a different tuning. And so I didn't know where the notes were that I was looking for, you know, so I'm going to learn all that stuff. And then when I get back into it, when I get my, like the cast off my finger. And so I sort of doodled around and, I was making, this is kind of cool. So then I couldn't wait. I got the cast off my finger, put the slide back on the so-called correct finger, and I was all over the place. It was hopeless because I'd got, in that short time, I'd gotten used to playing over the top of the neck. So it didn't seem like a big deal because I was only going to do 1 or 2 songs on the slide guitar as a novelty. So, okay, so I just did them like that. And it just grew from there because people would come up to me at the gig and they'd say, that one where you put that thing on your finger, can you do that one again? Or, I love that song. And so, okay, and two songs became 3 and 4 and 5, and so, it started to become a monster and took over more or less by popular demand. And I became known more as a slide player than anything else. Yeah.
And you got noticed right around the world for that, didn't you? Well,
when I made my first album, one of the very first thing actually was the guy that I sent a CD to was Jazz Obrick, the editor of Guitar Player magazine. It's the only promotional thing I did. I made the first CD and I fired one off because I loved Guitar Player magazine, and occasionally they did little articles in the back about local people. This is Billy so from Wisconsin, and he plays in a bar band, and I thought they might give me a little mention. So I sent it off, and he rang me up in the middle of the night, raving about it, and he said, "But what are you doing? Something's different." And he heard straight away that there was something unusual in the way I was playing, and of course it was that I was playing over the top of the neck. So he could hear from the sound of it, not just from the looks of it, but from the sound of it, that there was something unusual there. So it was, and when I got a record deal and went to America and started touring, the press made a huge thing of that, like it's, playing over the top from Down Under, and, it was something for them to hang their stories on. And I mean, you got incredible comments. There were comments in the press like magnificent, staggering, almost beyond belief. I mean, they didn't rave about any players like they were raving about you at the time. It was pretty surreal, actually, for me, when they came out with those kind of reviews, because I didn't think it was anything special, but it was so flattering and it was amazing, and everything just snowballed from that initial sort of interaction with Guitar Player magazine, and they did an article on me, and they also pushed my case with different record companies. And the one record company that I would have, above all, that I wanted to sign with was Alligator Records, because they were and still are the premier blues label in the world. And
so you always saw yourself as a blues player primarily?
Yeah, I did. But when I was playing around the pubs, just like as a working musician I did it for 20 years, really, before I made my first album. And so you'd have to play kind of all sorts of stuff. But I played rock and roll stuff, but mostly it was kind of stuff that had a little bluesy edge to it. Like, I'd do ZZ Top, cover of a ZZ Top song, because it's kind of bluesy anyway, So I sort of wasn't playing deep blues, or what I was, but I was just slipping those in between the hits, if you like,
Right. What took you so long to produce your first album?
Living in Perth. There was nowhere to record. So there was no decent recording studios here. And, we're talking a time when you couldn't make a recording in your own home. It was a big deal. And I would have had to come over to
the East Coast.
East Coast. And even then, there was no interest in blues in Australia. As a matter of fact, I did make a small demo tape when I went to Melbourne and lived in Melbourne for about 18 months, and I made a small demo tape, and I did send it to all the record companies, in Australia, and most of them didn't reply, and one of them said, "Well, no, we can't do blues. It's not. No one wants blues in Australia," and it's kind of true, because we're a very much pop-oriented country. And so that was one factor, but then there wasn't anywhere really. It was a coincidence that someone started up a good studio in Perth, and it was basically to record the Japanese artists. One of the guys who was a big shareholder in, or one of the directors or whatever of Sony, and he came to Perth and set up a studio, and it was to record the Japanese stars who'd come down and play golf on the nice sunny, golf courses in Perth, and record at the same time and not get harassed by fans, because some of the artists that came down, we didn't know who they were, and they'd come here to Perth and record, and like they were mega stars in Japan,
Right. So what are we talking, the late 80s, early 90s, when Australia was really popular for Japanese tourism?
Yeah, well, yeah, that's right. I mean, I made my first album in 1990, so that was at Planet Studios here in Perth, and the engineer was I'd known him for years, and he said to me one day, bumped into him, and he said, in between the acts that are coming down from Japan, we have a few days here and there. Why don't you come in and we'll give you a mate's rates and, just do something very quickly of your songs and that. And I go, I don't know. He said, yeah, come on. So we did, and we went in and we recorded in one day my entire repertoire, really, what I was playing in the pubs. We just did it from the start. We did it in the order we normally did it in the pub, more or less, and just played all our songs in one day.
Wow.
And then we mixed it the next day, about a day and a half. So it was just under 3 days of work. And and he, John Villani, the engineer, said, this was early days for CDs. I was going to make a tape and sell it at the gigs, And he said, this is turning out good, Dave. Why don't you make a CD, And I said, well, oh yeah, there's a place in Melbourne that'll do it. You send the tape over, and it was real early. No one in Perth had made a CD, so this was really something special. And I did, and made a few copies, and that's when I sent a CD to Guitar Player. And
right. So you're groundbreaking on a couple of fronts. You're groundbreaking with the way you're playing slide guitar. You're groundbreaking with being one of the first in Perth or in Western Australia, indeed, maybe even in Australia, to be making CDs. Can you name your favourite tune on that first CD?
I think it's Short Fuse Blues, probably. It was the title of the album, and it's I still play it. I still play it at most shows these days. It's I can't think that's probably the one. Although there's a song called The Bottle, which is sort of stuck as well. Tell me
a little bit about Short Fuse Blues.
Oh, it's just a blues. It's like, it's a, I don't know. It's one.
What do you like about it?
Well, I like the feel. It's a slow blues. There's 12/8 feel, which is a typical slow blues feel. And I wrote it. I wrote the lyrics. It's like about about a woman that about my baby went out and she said she'd be home soon, but she doesn't come back for 3 days, and blah blah blah. And it's just a blues, but I just like it. Yeah, and it's popular. I think that's really it. People, that was the song. I think that song, Keep Your Motor Running, actually also that was another song on there that got a lot of airplay initially, and still does. And so must be something about it if people like it. And
yeah, well, the crowds were loving you wherever you were playing in Western Australia. They were right onto you, weren't you? You were a massive hit there before anybody else heard about you.
Yeah, I had a following, so yeah, but it was a local sort of thing, people who were there week after week. There was one particular gig I used to do every Sunday, and this place would hold about 400 people, and it was packed every Sunday. And so I did that for about 5 years. So it was great, but of course it was preaching to the converted and all that, it was, but it kept me afloat, like financially. It kept me alive, kept me afloat till such time as I could venture further afield.
Yeah, right. And of course, then, as you said earlier, Bruce Iglauer, who was the president of Alligator Records, got hold of you, he signed you to Alligator Records with Short Fuse Blues, and you became the label's first and only non-US based signing. Another first for Dave Hole.
Yes, yeah, that's right. I took a bit of a gamble on me because initially Jazz Obrecht from Guitar Player magazine rang Bruce and said, got this guy, you got to hear him, blah, blah, blah. Sent a copy to Bruce, and Bruce sent me a letter, actually. Well, it was a fax, and saying, I do love the album. It's, Jazz has told me how good you are, and I agree, it's fantastic. It's wonderful, but we only really deal with American artists. It'd be too hard, when you're across the other side of the world and blah, blah, blah. And so, reluctantly, I'm not going to offer you a deal or anything, but, I really do like it. And I thought this was wonderful, getting a letter from Bruce Iglauer. So I showed it to all my friends. There's a rejection letter, really, I showed it to all my friends.
With great pride.
I was so thrilled that he liked it, let alone,
Yeah.
But anyway, so about 3 weeks went by, and then he actually phoned me and he said, "Have you signed with anyone yet?" And I says, "Well, no." And he says, "Well, I've reconsidered if you want to, think about it. We'd like to have you on the label." And this happened. I realised I've worked out later because I now know all the staff from Alligator, well, but they had been pestering him. So that typical record company, every Monday morning they have a meeting about, well, how's everything going, and anything particular, that we should be, new signings, anything, new music, what we should be doing. And every time they'd say, "What about Dave Hole?" And he'd say, "Look, no, it's too hard, and like, so about 3 Mondays in a row. And there was one lady actually who was she was sort of the A&R person there at the time, Mindy Giles, and she was particularly vehement about signing me. And she was also the one who'd recommended Stevie Ray Vaughan to Bruce Iglauer, and Bruce had turned Stevie Ray down. So she sort of had a little bit of kudos there, don't do it again,
Told you so, yeah. Who did Alligator have in their stable at the time?
Oh, there was a big star was Albert Collins. They had well, there was people like Johnny Winter, Roy Buchanan. It's kind of like a who's who for me. Billy Branch, Otis Rush.
All the people that you'd admired most.
Yeah, they were the people that I idolised. I mean, that's why I wanted to be on Alligator. I mean, probably a good 75% of my CDs that I was buying at the time were Alligator. Yeah. So, I mean, obviously I yearned to be on that label. I didn't dream that I'd ever be on the label, but, if you give me a choice, that was immediately my number one choice.
So, I mean, a bit of a stupid question, I can imagine the answer, but how did you feel then when the signing got done?
Oh, brilliant. I mean, but it was all quick. It was like, okay, now we're going to put the record out, because I'd already made it. They didn't have to record it. They just took it as it was. And said, well, we're going to release it, and you've got a tour, because, that was the thing, that you got a tour and we promote it. So it was like, pack your bags and let's go sort of thing. And off I went.
And what happens next?
Well, it was a baptism of fire. I mean, we landed in Chicago, the home of blues in America, and we had one night off, to really basically rehearse in the warehouse at Alligator and stuff. And then the next night, the first gig, and it was at Buddy Guy's Legends Club in Chicago, which is like a legendary club, and it was sold out. They promoted it really heavily, this guy from Australia, and press were all there, and Buddy Guy was there, It was like I died and gone to heaven, I was nervous, very nervous, of course. And
I was going to say, yeah, you would have been.
And it went really well. And the reviews, like in the Chicago Tribune, and that, they were glowing, and so we were off and running. And it was like a whirlwind. That first tour, we only had 2 nights off in the 9 weeks of the tour, and everything was one-nighters. Like we really ran ourselves into the ground, and I think the whole band lost kilos, between us. So we just hardly had time to think. So it was a really full on tour, and it was great. I mean, it's the sort of thing I guess I never really dreamed that I would ever do something like that. Be touring America as a blues artist. I mean, God knows they don't need blues artists to import blues artists. They've got, enough of their own, sort of thing. So it just seemed like unrealistic. But, and you get that, what I've now believed is called imposter syndrome, where you actually think, I don't really belong here. People are sort of saying, oh, it's great, and and you're touring, and that. So, but this is me. I don't. What's going on here? You don't feel like you belong in that sort of context. But I realise that's not unusual for artists.
So what was it about you? I mean, you are an exceptional guitar player, but was it that unique way of playing slide that really got everybody's attention?
I think it was. It was probably the thing that tweaked their interest, and because the first album was like 50% slide guitar songs and 50% standard, blues guitar. But I think that did get a lot of interest. And I mean, I don't know. It's really hard to analyze your own, playing and performances, because you just do. I mean, especially with blues, you just do what you do. You just do what you feel in your heart, and you just express yourself through the instrument, and you sing, and and you. And if people like it, it's great, But you can't analyze. I can't analyze why.
No, it's hard to be objective about yourself for sure. But I mean, you had people like Metallica's Kirk Hammett saying that you're one of his favourite guitarists. He said your slide playing kills him. You play so fast. Your phrasing, your intonation, and your tone are all perfect. What a compliment. I mean, there were others like Gary Moore, who heard that album Short Fuse Blues, who was so impressed that he invited you to come and do some European tours with him, didn't he?
Yes, that's right. Did a couple of tours with Gary, and I mean, it's wonderful. I think that's probably the best thing for a musician like myself is if your idols or your peers, but also that especially your idols, if they like what you do. I mean, one of my highlights was when Otis Rush, who I told you I grew up playing his records over and over in my bedroom when I was a teenager. When he came twice came to a show of mine in Chicago, and both times came up and played and jammed with us and played with us. And that was like, it's just not real, just surreal.
Yeah, I can imagine you'd just be pinching yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, how amazing. There was a review of you in Blues Review said that if this guy played with any more feeling, he'd have to go on Prozac. I like that.
Yeah, I know.
Did you read your own reviews?
Oh, well, not all of them. I mean, well, certain highlights and things. I mean, the record companies always collect all reviews, of all their artists. So any good ones, they use them in promotion if it's appropriate, sort of thing. So but obviously, when you're touring America, like at a breakneck speed, and that you're going from town to town, I mean, a lot of the press that you're doing interviews all the time, and going, like, usual thing, you'd get to a town, go straight to a radio station and do the local radio thing, and then do a sound check, and then try and get a bite to eat, do the show, sign things, try and get a bit of sleep, get up, travel to the next, do the radio, So you're on the go to the point where it's no time to sort of think about reading what people have written or not. But
so how long after did the next album come by?
Well, pretty quick. I actually made an album really quickly. It was about, I think it was just over a year that the next one was released.
At the record company's insistence?
Well, it's by mutual agreement. But I mean, I tended to, because I'm now working on album 11. So, but But I tended for the first few, there was like about 18 months interval, and that seemed to be about as quick as I could turn them out, actually. By the time you tour on the back of an album and you're trying to write songs and get material together at the same time and then record. And, it works on a basis of when it's going to be the street date, when's going to be the release. And then, so when do you need to have the recording done by? When do you have the mixing and the mastering thing done? So it was a period of time, I think the first 10 years particularly, but really for 20 years, where it was a process, where you just making, it wasn't boring, but it's like this, you make a record, you tour on it and you promote it, and then you take a little bit of time to get together the next material, which you've probably been working on all along anyway, and then repeat the cycle.
What did you see it as a pressure on you to keep turning them out?
It didn't seem too bad. I mean, there was times when it was a bit of pressure. Yeah, I'm particularly release date, because everything has to be geared. The record company, has to work on, you've got distributors to, everything's got to be done in a certain order and a certain time frame. So at times it was like, you've got to get it done by this time. And the other thing, I think that the biggest pressure I found was when we book a studio to do a recording, and it'd be a lockout. So, you've booked the studio for this week, right? And then I'd catch a cold, and I have to do the vocals. And so you're struggling to do the vocals. You're not at your best, but you just had to do it. There are some songs on certain albums that I can hear, and I'm going, I wish I could do that again, because I was struggling, having a flu or a cold or something.
And Dave Hole, how would you describe the evolution of those albums? How did they change one to the next?
Well, they changed, but I don't know if evolution is the right word, because the blues is something that it's kind of timeless. I dig back even now today. I mean, I write songs in the style of someone like Sunhouse, or some of these old guys that were playing in the 1930s. It's a big influence on me. Some of those, Charlie Patton and Robert Johnson and all those. So I don't think it's like an evolution, for me personally, or even for blues in general. It's kind of what it is, but everything's different. Every song's different, and every performance is different, because it's improvised, and because it comes from where you are at that time. So my albums, when I hear them or think about them, they are associated with a particular time, and a particular era, and particular songs have meaning of significance to me, and so it's kind of like they're all different, but I wouldn't say that they like this one builds on this one and builds on this, and then I changed direction totally and did this one,
Right.
But there is sort of, they all have they do have character, slightly different characters. Some of them are more full on, some of them more slightly more introspective in the songs that I was writing and so on,
Depending on what was going on in your life at the time.
Yeah. Well, when my father died, the next album I did was Under the Spell, and you can hear that I'm quite melancholy. It's all pretty down, and there's a couple of songs about my father, on there and stuff. So, it reflects your life, what the songs you do and the way you play them and everything.
Yeah. But by the time you got to the album Ticket to Chicago, you had some incredible players on there with you. That must have been have been an incredible experience for you. Tell us about that.
Yes. Well, that was Johnny B. Gaydon, the bass player, was Albert Collins' bass player, really, that sort of had been with Albert Collins all the time. And the rest of the band was made up, pretty much of Buddy Guy's band, the blokes that were playing with Buddy Guy at the time. And recording with them was wonderful, because they were just such great players. And Gene Barge, who's a legendary horn arranger in Chicago, who'd done stuff well, he was just an absolute legend in Chicago, and he wrote some horn arrangements for some of the songs, and that was a buzz too. Yeah.
Did Alligator put those guys together for you, or were you able to call on them to
Pretty
join?
much. I mean, well, we discussed. I mean, Johnny B. Gaden was that was the go-to. I said, can we get Johnny? Can we get him? And so yeah, we got in contact, and he was keen to do it and all that. So, but it was a kind of between us and who was available and everything. But they were guys that I knew well. I knew their
work.
I knew their work. Yeah.
Yeah. And are you still with Alligator today?
Not as such. This next album, the last album I didn't release. I released it more or less independently. The problem being that I really can't commit to tour. Well, I couldn't with COVID. I couldn't tour in America, and it is pretty essential. The way, as particularly now, the way the record industry's gone now, as we all know, it's all streaming and everything like that, and live performance is now the big money earner. I mean, you don't earn much money from. It used to be you do live performances to promote your record, and now you put a record out to promote your live performances. Really, so
crazy, isn't it?
That's. If I'm not, it's basically if I'm prepared to tour, then I can release through Alligator. But if I'm staying home and I'm just putting it out and maybe touring a bit in Australia and stuff, then really it's not the way to go.
Yeah. So how do you feel about touring the States again?
I'm a bit over it, to be honest. It's pretty, at my age, it's pretty grueling, and it's full on. And I've done it for 25 years, and I don't know if I'm particularly keen to do more of the same for another how many years and then drop dead, So I'm sort of really enjoying having a little more time, free time at home and that sort of thing. So I'm not ruling it out, but I may just sort of do a couple of things. If there's good we do get festival offers and stuff, and maybe just do some good, interesting things that I'm interested in. Same goes for Europe. I mean, I've toured a lot in Europe as well, and we continue to get a lot of offers to go there. But
I bet you do.
Yeah, been sort of not accepting them lately.
No, I get that too. It's a huge effort. Everything gets harder. Certainly post-COVID, the whole travel situation got amazingly worse. And as one gets older, it seems a bit too hard. I hear what you're saying, but there wouldn't be too much left on your bucket list to achieve either. I mean, you've gone beyond your wildest dreams in your career anyway.
Well, I have in the level, what blues as regards what the blues market is, and so I have. Well, I've never been one setting goals to achieve. I've never been like that. Things that have happened, as we've discussed, to me have been more or less coincidences. I'm a really lucky guy that I got to record and that someone got to hear it, and so it's all kind of happened to me. And I've never been overly ambitious, but I have done things that I feel like I don't know. I would just be repeating myself, really, which is nothing wrong with that because I enjoy playing to audiences. I mean, I love playing, but there's no real imperative to sort of get out there and like make a name for myself and all that sort of thing. I just so I kind of do what you
want to do.
yeah. But it's interesting. My German agent used to phone me and he'd say, we've got this festival, and he'd say, and it's a really great festival, Dave, and it pays really good money,
Very good.
Yeah, and then a few years ago, I said, I'm really mainly interested. I only really want to do things that I enjoy. So now I get phone calls and there's this festival, Dave, and it would be such fun. You would enjoy it.
He's changed his tack.
Yeah. So now that's the sales pitch now. Oh, you'll enjoy it. You'll love it,
Oh, that's very cute. Dave Hole, it's been fabulous chatting with you. I saw you not so long ago playing here in Melbourne with Jeff Atchison and the blues band that you had going on there. I believe you guys are getting back together again with that band, because it was one of the most extraordinary performances that I've ever seen, and I've been out there seeing live music since I was a young one too. Right. So I'm hoping
we are doing it again. We're doing some shows in New South Wales in May, and then back to Victoria in, I think it's October. I'm not sure, September, October.
Well, you can guarantee on my patronage I shall be there in full swing to see you, because you certainly put everything you have into that guitar and to your stage performance, don't you? You must come out of a performance just exhausted.
Get a little bit like that these days, but not really. It's uplift. It's, for me, it's fun. It's an enjoyable thing to do. I just love playing guitar and playing blues, and so it's not really. It's never the time on stage is always the best time. You know, it's like when you're touring. There's all this. You know, you haven't slept for days and blah blah, and you can't get time to eat proper food and all that. But the time on stage is the payoff. That's what you're doing it for.
And it's so obvious. I mean, you guys just have the best time up there, and that transcends into the audience, and the audience reflects it back to you. You're amazing out there. And from a big blues fan, I thank you so much for your contribution to blues music. Long may it continue. And thank you so much for chatting with me today. Can't wait, as I said, to see you back here. And for our American and European and anywhere else fans listening, they can get hold of your CDs at the moment, or back to vinyl is the way to go too. They can listen to you and maybe not necessarily see you so much. We'll just keep you here in Australia.
All right. Well, thanks, Sandy. It's been a pleasure.